I want to, okay. um, I want to mention how really inspired I am by this piece. My dad was involved in the Korean conflict, and he taught down at Fort Gordon, and I never had the opportunity to talk to him about it. But as I read this book, I read names that my dad used to teach school with, and I saw these people in a totally different light than I did when I was growing up. And Randy and Roxanne, you guys know these people better than I could possibly imagine. And their story is so inspirational. And when you say the unexpected journey and the unforgotten war, I can't say it enough. 50,000 people got killed, and you guys did an absolutely fantastic job making that story become a reality, especially for these individuals in Evansville that fought at the Chosin Reservoir. So first of all, thank you all very much. Welcome to our society, and I feel very honored to have you guys speak for us. So thank you very much for doing this with us.
Thank you.
So we're ready to go?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay.
Do we need to do something with the PowerPoint?
Yeah, Jennifer, getting the PowerPoint up.
Yeah, you need to share. Now is when you can share your screen and bring up the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, can you all see that?
Not yet.
Okay. Wait a second.
Did you select share screen?
I think I did not.
And then you have to select your
Then you get it.
PowerPoint.
Okay,
Okay.
there it is.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Now
Thank you.
it's coming.
That's it. Thank you, guys. We got it now.
Okay.
Roxanne?
Okay. Well, getting into this story kind of started for us in 1989. We bought an old French country house in Oakland City, Indiana, and we had our 4 kids with us, and we walked through this house and we just kind of fell in love with it. And the owner's name was Garnet Fitch. And we found out later from the realtor that she really wanted to sell this house to us because she'd raised 4 kids there too. Is this showing up right?
You might want to select from current slide.
Okay.
That'll make it bigger.
Okay. I'm clicking on it, but it's not doing anything.
So you're just seeing the smaller version.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Should I get out of it and get back in maybe?
Will it let you do from the beginning?
No, I keep clicking on that and it's not doing anything.
You might try stopping the share
Okay,
and then opening your PowerPoint again.
okay. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that.
There we go.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, you want to get that next one? You get this.
Okay, so here's the house. It also just happened to be a couple blocks from Oakland City College where both of us worked. So that was pretty nice too. But this was a lady in her 80s and she was very gracious, very dignified. But she had this sort of sadness that you could kind of sense. And so when she moved out, we went upstairs. Of course, you think everything's going to be moved out, but the upstairs was left kind of like 2 boys still lived there. There were things in the drawers, and our oldest son, Ryan, was looking around and he found this picture. And it was a picture of these guys.
Oh, man.
And this was in front of one of the train stations at Evansville.
Which we did not know where it was from. did we,
Right, at the time, we had no idea, but we just thought it seemed like it went with the house. So we put it in a frame and put it on our mantle. And then one day, Randy noticed an older man outside looking at the house.
So I'll pick it up from
Take it
there.
from
Yeah,
there.
and I would like to say a couple of things about Garnet. I remember watching her when she left, and she was in her 80s and had raised 4 kids there. I think she lived there 60 years. And I watched her go from room to room, touching the walls and talking to the walls. It was very, very moving. You could just feel the history there. And there, as Roxanne said, there was a great sadness. I had seen a room like that before in Southern Illinois, by the way, where a family had lost a son in a car accident. And they left things the way it was there in the house. So I had some vibe of that, but still we didn't know what the picture was. So I'm sitting in my easy chair and there's a guy looking through my living room window. And I would have said at the time he was an older guy. I suppose he's younger than we are right now, Roxanne. At the time he seemed old. And I went out there and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "I'm so sorry. I thought Garnet still lived here." And he told me his name. And he said, "My best friend lived here. And I like to come and visit here. I'm from Nebraska." He taught at the University of Nebraska. "And I just, when I'm back here to see my family, I always come by the house here." And I said, "Hey, I've got a picture I want to show you. Could you tell me about this picture?" So I brought him into the house and he looked at that picture and his hands started to shake. And he kept saying, "I don't remember anybody taking this picture. I don't remember anybody taking this picture." And so he told us about the picture, that it was the guys from Oakland City that were part of the Evansville Marine Corps Reserve group getting ready to ship out to Camp Pendleton and train to go to the Civil War, or the Korean War. And so they're the guys. And can you see my pointer?
Yeah.
The second guy from the left is the young man that lived in our house. His name was Bud Fitch. And then the third guy from the left is Gordon Green. That's the guy that was looking through my window. So Gordon told me that the next guy in the middle, the real short guy, Bill Marshall, who's a fairly well-known lawyer there from Oakland City, just recently passed away. He was in town. He'd been in that group and I should talk to him. So he went to Bill and Bill said, "Hey, C Company has been meeting for a while every month. If you're interested in the story, come to one of the meetings." So that got us started on meeting these people, and we started doing interviews, and they brought letters and they connected us to other people. So things really took off at that point. To really get into the story, and there's all sorts of titles you could give this, but I'm really amazed at how things large and small are connected and how they converge. How did these guys from Oakland City end up having this unexpected journey? And we've got to go way back and look at history and see how history works and how it touches our lives in ways that we're not even aware of. So I'm going to take us back just for a minute, back to the end of World War II. After a decade or over a decade of depression and 4 years of war, America was ready to relax and enjoy some economic growth and spending. There was a mass demobilization of the armed forces. The armed forces was cut drastically. There was the thinking that there would be no more wars. The Soviet Union had been our allies during World War II. China hadn't fallen to the communists yet. And we had the United Nations to fix things if there were any kinds of things going on that would be of concern between nations. So one of the things that the United Nations did is they divided Korea. And the reason Korea got divided was that at the end, or toward the end of World War II, we thought we were going to have a tough fight with the Japanese. And so we wanted the Russians to come in and help take some of the hit from that, not realizing that the war would end rather quickly after the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs. So the Russians set up a communist government in North Korea. Of course, the Americans supported another regime in South Korea. So that was the situation. And I want to go now to 1946 to another situation. And there's your friend, James Paul Torian. So in 1946, Congress, the president, leaders in the country decided to cut back on the armed forces. And they talked about getting rid of the Marine Corps or putting it under the direction of the Navy. So the commandant and Marine Corps leaders thought they better come up with something pretty quick to head this off. So they went to the White House, they went to the Armed Forces Congressional Group, and they said, listen, you can cut us back, but what we would suggest you do is create a reserve system where several cities in the United States would have a company of Marine Corps reservists. So there ended up being 120 of these Marine Corps reserve units, and then cities would bid for them, and Evansville got one of them. So there's Paul Torian taking the certificate, I guess, blessing Evansville with the Marine Corps Company unit. Captain William Chipp, he later became a general, I believe. So now the issue would be, how do we get these, the recruiting part. And this is just something from one of the Evansville papers here about 19 people coming in, joining the reserve. So one of the groups that came in pretty quick were the World War II vets that liked that camaraderie that they'd had in the armed forces. So you had some vets coming in. You had, and some of that may have been boredom. They were paid. They met weekly. They were paid for that. There was volunteer summer training out on the East Coast at the couple of Marine Corps camps out there, and that worked. But then the Marine Corps got the idea. They started telling these leaders in these towns, try to get the high school kids. So they offered sports. A company has 4 platoons. So Paul Torian went out and he got 4 coaches. He got Jim Graham, he got Tex Graham, he got Hermie Will, and he got Jim Roush to be the platoon leaders. And they brought in all their football and basketball and baseball players. And then the reserve had a baseball team, and industrial leagues were very strong all over the country back then. They were probably as good as some of the professional teams. And the reserve unit there in Evansville won the city tournament one time in baseball. So they were good athletes. What about places like Oakland City? So Oakland City, the first guy to join was a guy by the name of Barney Barnard. And let's go back up. Can we back up, Roxanne? Go to the boys. Yeah. Show you. Barney Barnard is 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th guy from the left there. And his father was a superintendent at the old Bend coal mining. And he was in school. He was going to become an engineer. And so he joined and he pulled in Gordon Green, and Gordon Green pulled in Bud Fitch. And then that just progressed. I think it ended up there were 11 guys from Oakland City that came into the
And
reserve.
from a lot of the small towns around
Yes.
too, you know, Boonville
Boonville.
and all the
Yeah.
Posey County,
Uh,
all different places around.
Tell City had a couple. So yeah, they were coming in from all over the place. The Oakland City guys told us the thing that they liked was the fact that they could go into the Frontier Bar, even though they were underage, and they had to be served because they were wearing uniforms. And that was kind of the unstated rule of the day.
Yeah, but their parents probably didn't know that. And also too, a big thing was, remember, there weren't going to be any more wars.
Yes.
So, you know, some parents signed for their underage kids, or they got talked into it. Some of them were nervous about doing it, but they signed for them to do that because there weren't going to be any wars.
And they were told they could quit anytime they
Yes.
wanted,
Right.
except in the case of national emergency. And there weren't going to be any national emergencies. You know, that just wasn't on the horizon. So everybody was kind of happy with this setup. I want to say this about Bud Fitch, because one of the things that happens when you write a book is there'll be a character, at least one character, and it may be a community, it may be a mountaintop, who knows, but there'll be a character come out of nowhere and sort of take over your book. And that guy was Bud Fitch's friend, Gordon Green.
Mhm.
Gordon Green becomes one of the centers of the book because of the guilt he felt after Bud was killed, and we'll get to that later. Bud himself was very witty.
Mhm.
He had a academic scholarship at Purdue.
Yes, going to Purdue.
Wasn't particularly athletic,
Wanted to be, but.
They wanted to be right. And these guys too, I think the other thing you got to remember, these guys were in the shadows of World War II. They were young boys, and I think the Sands of Iwo Jima had just come out about this time in 1947. And so this was an exciting and a big deal. Want to talk a little bit about the training. You have their story, Roxanne? It's kind of interesting.
Just a little bit here to introduce this. David Graham was one of the reservists, and he was a Bossy High School student. He joined in 1947, and so they had these 2-hour sessions on Saturdays of training. And so he said some of the things they did were close order drills. They had lectures. They fired 22 caliber rifles at an inside firing range. They carried out field problems. And sometimes he said the lecturers tried to bring in some reality to it. So he was telling us about one session they were sitting in where this lecturer pulled out a hand grenade, and he was showing him how to take the pin out, and it slipped out of his hands and rolled across the floor. So one guy jumped up, took it, threw it through the window, broke the glass and everything. But you didn't hear anything. It wasn't a real one.
It wasn't done. I mean, it was done on purpose.
He was paying attention.
So what did he say about the?
So what the lecturer said, that he exhibited true Marine-like composure, the guy that threw through the window.
Well, let's talk about that training. So here's a couple of Evansville guys, I think at the, it was near Virginia Beach there on the East Coast, their summer training. And when we started shopping around for someone to publish the book, the Naval Institute Press jumped on it. And they had a fellow there that they worked with. He was considered the major Marine Corps historian. And this is what he said about these summer trainings. Once a week, nighttime drills, which they did at Evansville, inhibited training, and summer camps were not well attended. More significantly, new recruits did not attend boot camp or receive advanced training. I want to reiterate that. They did not go to boot camp, nor did the ones who went to the Korean War from Evansville. That would be an issue with Marine Corps historians. When we came to the Naval Institute Press, they were real excited about this. This story hadn't been told. And Colonel Alexander said it's because the generals didn't want to hear that there were Marines that fought and died that hadn't been through boot camp. That was a big deal with them. These reservists, Colonel Alexander said, were largely untrained, and many had joined for social and athletic reasons, which was certainly true of the Evansville group. The result of these circumstances was a reserve unprepared for war. So it's sad, but that was the case with these, and of course nobody saw what was about to come. So everything would have been fine except on June the 24th, and that's another where a man and woman actually got sworn into the Marine Corps Reserve. So here's the headline in Evansville with the beginning of the Korean War. So in 1947, 46 or 47, we disarmed the South Korean army because we didn't want them starting a war. And we assumed that North Korea had a weak force also. And of course, we had a large military situation there in Japan. So we had disarmed them. What we didn't know was that the Soviet Union was arming and training the North Koreans, and that their leader was hot to, like the South Korean leader was hot to reunify the country. So North Korea attacked South Vietnam on South Korea. I do a lot of writing on Vietnam. South Korea in June the 24th, 1950. And just a little diagram here. So if you look at this, the North Koreans were so successful that by July, they had pushed what American forces were there that had come in to try to stop the invasion from Japan to that little perimeter down there at Pusan that's in the yellow. So the question was, were we going to evacuate? were we just going to give up on Korea, or were we going to stand and fight? And Truman decided we were going to stand and fight. So how are you going to do that? And Truman selected and started working with MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, who was in Japan at the time. And MacArthur said, what we will do is, if you see up there in the north west part of Korea, Incheon, that's a port city. It's close to Seoul. Seoul's just a few miles away from Incheon. Incheon is an interesting place to land an army. I think there's only 2 days out of the month that the tides allow you to dock there. And so it was a very narrow window, and MacArthur's argument was, well, never expect us to attack there, which was true. Well, so you've got an amphibious landing. What do you got to have if you got an amphibious landing? You got to have Marines. Wait a minute, we don't have enough Marines. Wait a minute, we've got the Marine Corps Reserve. Wait a minute, we got to have a national emergency. Well, Truman took care of that. Truman declares a national emergency, and the reservists cannot get out, even though they were promised they could, except in this case, with the emergency. Too late. So our reservists here in Evansville get called up. This is going on in July, and it gets put off for a while. These are some of the guys from Oakland City here in the Oakland City newspaper. Marines reservists could be called leave in a matter of hours. Here's another one, which is in the Evansville Courier. So the Oakland City guys start preparing to leave. They're going to leave in September or August the 28th. August the 28th. And in that picture, the tall guy back there is Albert Dixon. He becomes a well-known teacher and principal after the Korean War. And then next to him, in front of him, is Gordon Green. And then next to Gordon is Bud Fitch, and then some of the other Oakland City guys there. So that's at a little hamburger place where those boys experienced kind of a going away time. Gordon Green and Bud Fitch spent their 2 or 3 weeks waiting to ship out, riding around on Bud's old beat up motorcycle. They rode around all the coal mines, the stripper mines there around Oakland City. And while they were out driving around, they would stop and get in the shade, and they talk about going to war and what it would be like. And they talked about what it would be like to come home and tell these war stories to their grandchildren. So they were very kind of a romantic notion about war and what that was going to be like. So, this is the Barnard family, and Barney's there on the left. Across the street is the old ad building to Oakland City College. His mother taught, Neva Barnard, taught at Oakland City. And I'd forgotten this, Roxanne. The reason that Garnet Fitch and Neva Barnard were best friends, the reason why Garnet was selling her house was she'd been driving in Princeton with Neva, and somebody ran a stop sign and hit their car and killed Neva, and she felt so bad about it. She gave up her driving and decided to go live out in Kansas with her son. It just really upset her.
That was very sad.
Kind of
very sad.
Another connection there with that. This is at the railroad station in Evansville, and they're leaving. As I say, it's August 28th. They're going to Camp Pendleton. Here's another picture. I really love this picture. That's the mom, that's the son. That's Denning Campbell. I don't know if any of you know Denning or not. And that's his mother. And she was there watching him getting ready to go. And there's the Oakland City boys. That's when that picture was taken there at the L&N train station. When they got there, they took this last picture of the group, of all the group ever being together. 6 of them would die in the Korean War. Many of them would be severely injured, but that's the group. Paul Torian is down there. I think Tex Graham is next to him. I can't Tex.
That's Tex, I think.
Yeah, that's Tex there, and then that's Paul there. Paul's tall. Bud Fitch is way back there. And if you get the picture where you can see it, you can you know these guys. you can spot them pretty easily. Here they are coming into Pendleton, marching in. There they are, and here's another problem. So they put them into they put them into two groups that are going overseas. One group would go over in 2 weeks, and they were the ones that had the most training, even though that didn't mean anything, as it turned out. And then the next group would go over in 4 weeks. So one group would get 2 weeks training at Pendleton, and one would get 4 weeks. They were promised, and this was stated in the Evansville Courier, the parents and these people and their families were promised that they would have 6 months of combat training before they'd ever go into combat. The first Evansville reservist killed in the Korean War was killed 2 weeks after leaving Pendleton. So that never happened. But they looked pretty relaxed there, and of course didn't know what they were getting into. This is an interesting picture. Not everybody went. Some of them stayed and worked there at Pendleton, supporting their company and other Marines. So this fellow here was a postal worker, and I think his 3 brothers were postal workers there in Evansville, and he and his wife and his children are here. Does anybody recognize the bigger boy? Well, you wouldn't know who it was, but that young man would grow up to be, I think, the best Indiana high school basketball player in the 1960s. He led the scoring, led the state in scoring in 1962. He led the nation in scoring in 1966. He was a 2-time All-American at Purdue, first-round draft choice of the Chicago Bulls. Anybody into sports? Dave Shellhouse from North. So that's David there, and that's his father, Dave Shellhouse Sr. So interesting there. So this is Gordon Green. Look how young he looks.
Yeah, excited.
How excited he is. He just has no idea what's about to happen. I want to talk a little bit about what happened to the first group that went over. First of all, they got 5 rounds of shots. Their records kept getting lost, and many of them got shots 5 times. And so that was a gripe. I remember them talking about how sore they were when they got over there. So, the military isn't the most organized thing in the world, apparently. So the first group of Evansville troops actually were flown over there in a commercial jet to the Kempo Airport there by Seoul to come in as quick as they could to help in wrestling back Seoul from the North Koreans. So that fight was going on. And that's where the first Evansville reservist, John Elliott, was killed. They were going down the road in a convoy. They were taking fire. They got out of their vehicles and they went across this rice paddy, and one of them hit a mine, and the guy behind him was hit, and he died of shock. He wasn't hurt that bad.
A lot of people died of shock in that war
during that time. So he was the first one. So the war changes when the Americans landed in Incheon. The North Koreans, their supply lines are cut off, and now we got an invasion. And this is an interesting thing too, because here's another one of these situations where somebody far, far away is making a decision that's going to get you experiencing something you don't want to experience. But Truman wasn't sure about invading North Korea. I mean, okay, we got back to the 38th parallel, right? So do we stop or do we go on? And MacArthur says, let's go on. Let's reunite it. Let's get it over with. And Truman said, well, what about the Chinese? I mean, there's the Chinese right up there at the border of North Korea. And MacArthur said, oh, they won't come into the war. So we invaded North Korea, and those triangles represent the highest ridge of a group of mountains there through the center of North Korea. And so we divided the invasion into 2 parts. On the west side was the 8th Army, and they moved very quickly and captured North Korea's capital. It's moving up toward the border with China there at the Yalu River. Our guys, the Evansville reservists, landed at Wonsan. This is mostly a Marine operation, and they would go up here on this direction, and then when they got to the top of North Korea, the two groups would meet. But they were making their way to the Chosin Reservoir, which is a large body of water. It was dammed, and they used that for hydro electricity there in North Korea. The next map has the next thing there. Okay.
Yes,
This is very interesting. So our guys get scattered out there. Some of them are together, some of them are not. They're all over the place. At this point in time, half the American troops, the Marine Corps, half of them are reservists. Now, remember, they've not been in war, they've not been well trained, and fortunately, the people who are regular Marines, and a lot of them were World War II vets, they kind of teamed them up together when the fighting got rough, and it really saved the day. But the reservists really did well considering the situation. So here they are, and this first star is a perimeter at Chinhung Nai. Now, what the Marine Corps did, and the Army didn't do this, the Marine Corps built on their way up here to Hagaru on the south end of the reservoir. They built these little forts, these little perimeters where they had artillery, and they had airfields, and they could protect themselves. So they could get in that perimeter, and they could keep from being overrun. Now the road up, and this is through mountains, the road up here to the Chosin Reservoir was basically a dirt track through the mountains. There were cliffs on one side and chasms on the other. And so here they are, the roads going to up to Kodari and then Hagaru. And then Hagaru was the biggest base. And then the farthest north the Marines got was Udam Ni. So they're all stretched out during this time. And I want to say very quickly, on the east side of the Chosin, and I've written an article and also a chapter in a book about Hoosiers in the Korean War. On this east side was about 3,500 Army of the 7th Division. And out of that 3,500, only 300 of them escape. And this is not a very well-known event in American military history. It's kind of like the Little Bighorn. You just don't hear anything about it. The main leader of the group was from Washington, Indiana. He would win the Medal of Honor, and he would die up there. They never brought his body back. And there were several heroes, and a couple of the heroes were from Oakland City. In fact, Charlie Garrigus was driving the truck that had Colonel Faith's body in it when they were trying to break out with all the wounded. But again, that's a very sad, very dramatic story. And the ones that escaped made it back across the frozen reservoir to the Marine lines. Well, before I tell you about what's about to happen, I want to find McGarry's picture here. You're going to hear Roxanne read some letters from Raleigh McGarry, and he was from Poseyville.
Posey County.
Yeah. And before she does, one more thing. Military historians say that the Chosin Reservoir was the most difficult environment that the American military ever fought. It was cold. The temperatures got down to 60 degrees below zero wind chill. Some say 80 degrees wind chill, and probably 40 degrees just below zero anyway. And a lot of people just froze to death. If you were wounded, and a lot of the guys told us this, if you were wounded, you wouldn't bleed, it would freeze. And so that would be helpful, but you had to get somewhere, or you would freeze to death, and they had these warming tents. So here's some letters that Raleigh McGarry wrote to his wife during this time before things got bad.
Okay. This one was November 19th, 1950. Since I wrote you last, it has been pretty cold. Too cold to write a letter even. The sun came up and warmed us up a little yesterday. I've been too busy most of the time to notice how cold it really was. We have our hole lined with straw and managed to keep pretty warm in our sleeping bags. They're wonderful. But the rest of the time we get cold and huddle around a fire, which isn't allowed at night, of course. Sure would be nice to take a bath and change clothes. I'm still wearing what I left Japan in, and instead of changing, I just add more. All I change is my socks, and not very often on those. I've managed to wash 3 times and shave once. My teeth are in pretty filthy condition. I hope my letters aren't as bad as they seem to me. I should get some mail from you in a day or so. Then maybe I can write better. All my love again. And some of the things that we heard that, they don't necessarily say in letters is, there was a period of time when people couldn't do their necessaries, really, when there's battle going on.
Yeah, once the Chinese came to the war.
Yes.
So any bathroom things had to be done while you had your clothes on.
It's hard to imagine,
Yeah.
really. This one was November 25th.
It's Thanksgiving.
Yes, Thanksgiving Day. It rained all day and night and then left us with 0-degree weather. We just finished our Thanksgiving dinner. We are supposed to leave Korea by the 15th day of the new offensive, which was to have started this morning. MacArthur is supposed to be over here now, and he seems anxious to get the Marine Corps home. I hope so. I find it pretty hard to write letters. It's not so bad if you think it's going to be just in another 15 days. It's only for another 15 days. Love forever. That and Home by Christmas was a slogan that they
Yep.
heard a lot.
Well, that's what MacArthur said. They'll be home by Christmas. So,
Yes. Let me go and read this next one.
yes.
Okay. I'm sitting in our tent wrapped around our oil stove, freezing to death. The wind sure can find places to come in. The weather around here isn't like any place I've ever seen. It gets almost warm when the wind isn't blowing, but when it does, it comes from the North Pole. It seems we're supposed to stay here until we go home. That will be the 8th of December. Every time I tell you such news, we keep still moving farther north. I'm taking another chance. If it's any colder north of here, I don't want any. It's late, so I'll close with oceans of love. And his next letter on November 29th, he says, my pen is frozen up and doesn't write so well. It's really hard to get a good night's sleep in a combat area. We had about an inch of snow last night and I was standing watch, so I nearly looked like a snowman when it was over. Also, for the first time, I didn't have a roof on my foxhole, so it was full of snow before I realized what was happening. There I was pulling snow out of the hole and putting up a shelter in the middle of the morning, 2 a.m. I have to get this in the mail, so I'll close with barrels of love. See you Christmas. MacArthur said so. Love till the well runs dry.
Can you give me that, Roxanne?
Sure.
We'll look at some of those guys that were up there. So here's some pictures of, that's at Hagaroo. And is that Eberly?
I
Okay.
think so.
Yeah, that's Richard Eberly. And there's another, that's probably a warming tent there. The guy on the right is Bill Wright. I believe he's still alive, but not, there's only, and maybe Bill Etheridge. I don't think there's very many of them that are still here with us. And that's Richard Eberly. That's at Wonsan there.
Yes, and Richard Eberly is the name to remember because he becomes important in the history of the sea company.
We're gonna talk about
Okay.
that. Yeah, let's
So now
let's
go
show this.
to,
Okay,
okay.
so you would think that an American military force would be able to spot close to 1 million Chinese soldiers. But they missed it. Some say 300,000 to 500,000 soldiers, Chinese soldiers, came in and surprised the American forces. On the west side, the Americans had enough room where they would just retreated faster than the Chinese and were able to escape. Most of them, some of them got surrounded in the initial attack. But over here in the mountains, these guys got surrounded. They were surrounded, and they were told, the soldiers were told to eradicate the Marine Corps, the Marines there, to kill them, to wipe them out, to make a point. And so that was the situation. And there on the east side, where the army was, they got surrounded and tried to get back the Marine Corps lines to this perimeter. That's why those perimeters were so important, where you could defend them, at least have a chance to get away. And the ones that escape again came across the frozen reservoir there. So they called for a retreat, and they did it in, they started at UDAME, and this group was the most extended, and they had to fight their way to Hagaroo. Meanwhile, the people there at Hagaroo, they needed to build an airfield to allow planes to come in and out, to bring supplies, and to start taking out the wounded. So it turned out that the engineers that they had there, some of them didn't know how to drive the stakes to level off the ground. And Barney Barnard, whose dad was the superintendent at the Enos coal mine, loved to go out and drive straight stakes and help him level the ground. So he wrote a letter to his dad, and he said, "Boy, I got a big job here. I'm the one sitting all the stakes and showing him how to make it the ground level here to get the airfield the way it needs to be." So there's a case of a guy that did something very important that you just never hear about. So some of the Evansville guys were up here. There's all sorts of stories in the book I won't go into, of narrow escapes. I will tell you this story. One of the reservists who was left up there, he was horribly wounded. They couldn't carry him out. They were up on a ridge trying to get down to the main road. And he said, "You know, I'm dying, leave me here." And they left him with a grenade. And everybody's gone now. I don't suppose it make any difference, but I just don't feel comfortable saying names. But you know, what do you do when the mother comes to you when you get home and says, "Hey, you know what happened to my son?" And of course, they told a story. It wasn't that story, but those kinds of things happened all around. There was one Evansville reservist who was left abandoned. His outfit got wiped out in a battle one night. He was up kind of on one of the mountains. And when he woke up the next day, everyone was dead around him. And he scooted down on his butt all the way down this mountainside, tumbling and falling, and made it to the last truck that was making its way out, fighting its way to Hagaroo. So they get to Hagaroo, and then they come down to this one, and then so forth down to the coast. And the Marine Corps is able to escape. And in fact, they knock out several Chinese divisions in their escape. So the Marine Corps, if you've ever heard their mantra, if you've ever seen those movies where they go in these schools and recruiting, they'll talk about the Frozen Chosen and different famous battles. But that was one where they were actually retreating, but nevertheless, the Marine Corps, they've good publicity there with that story. So what happens after that? The Marines are brought back to the Pusan area, and the war becomes static by about March of 1951. What happened was the Chinese discovered what we discovered: your supply lines are too drawn out. So right there, that line is about as far as you can go, whether you're going north or whether you're going south. That 38th parallel is about as far as you're going. So they're battling in February, March. The war probably was a turning point there where no one was going to win at that point. I guess somebody could have, if they gave it everything, their national treasures, to have done it, but they had more sense than that. So how do you get out of that, you see? So they're fighting, and they're fighting for every inch along this line. This is like World War I trench fighting during this time. So it's during February of 1951 that Bud Fitch finally comes to Korea. And once he gets here, and Gordon Green receives letters from his mother saying, "Hey, try to find Bud Fitch, your buddy. He's over in Korea now." So Gordon just works himself silly trying to find Bud. Meanwhile, Bud is up here on the 38th parallel, and the largest battle of the Korean War is about to take place on April 24th, 1951, one day after Bud Fitch's birthday. I want to read to you some of the letters that Bud Fitch wrote to Garnet Fitch. This was in early March. "I sweat while I'm moving, and then I get cold when I stop. It's hard to write with mittens on. It is impossible to advance more than 3 to 5 miles during one day through this terrain, even if you don't meet any resistance. The views, however, are breathtaking. We will be standing on a ridge, and way below is a valley you can hardly see. We go all the way down and all the way up the other side. It takes all day, and you haven't gone a mile by map. If someone would have told me a month ago I would be walking the distance I have with the loads I have carried, I would have told them they were crazy. So Bud Fitch had that metamorphosis of becoming a warrior, a soldier during that time. And I think he was proud of that. In late March, he wrote this: if we stop at the 38th parallel, it won't be too long, maybe before the war ends. We have reached the 38th parallel almost all along the line now. If they decide not to cross, the fighting may come to a close. And in fact, they were negotiating. Both sides were negotiating, wanting the war to be over, but it would go on for what, 2 more years before it would end. So with the loss of a lot of people during that time. I want to read to you the last letter that Bud wrote to his mother before he was killed. It has been raining all day today. I'm set up in a trench dug by the Chinese and have a shelter over me, so I'm pretty dry. So I like to think about him being in a dry spot, thinking about his family at home. I know in another letter, he said to his mother, she said, I guess you get tired of all this stuff. And he wrote and said, no, I love it. I love everything you can tell me about what's going on at home. Bud goes ahead and says in this letter, there are some nice bunkers here, not far from here, but I have to sleep near the gun. He's in the mortar crew now. So in the mortar crew, he's a little bit behind the front lines. The mortars are used to protect and the people there on the front line. So it's a relatively safe place if you have to be at the front. I cut my thumb on a ration can this morning and can't write too well. Maybe it will get infected and I can go back and have it fixed. I had a corpsman fix it up though. You know, and this is so interesting to me. I think he was contemplating his own death. You know, you're supposed to regret that you played around and didn't study hard in high school, but I don't feel that way at all. Then he talks about the maybe being replaced by the next round of draftees coming in, and then he signs off. So on April 22nd at night, the Chinese attack in the biggest battle of the war. The Marine Corps lines are overrun, and the mortar crews are called up to the front line to pick up rifles and try to keep from the Chinese getting through and breaking through the lines. We were not sure when we wrote the book how Bud died. There were several stories. There were all sorts of stories. He was electrocuted. He was shot by a friendly fire, all sorts of things. Here a while back, somebody read the book and claimed to have emailed me and said he'd seen Bud after he was injured, and he had been wounded by a explosion, by a shell, and had died from that. Meanwhile, after Bud's death, Gordon Green in his letters is writing home and saying, you know, I can't find Bud, I can't find Bud. And he didn't hear about his death until May of that year. So the war ends, and I'll quickly run through some of these pictures. Here's a group of the Marine Corps Reserve guys from Evansville right after that big battle. And there's Gordon Green in back, second from the right, and that's Dixon there, Albert Dixon from Oakland City, there to his right. But those guys are all from Evansville. There's a picture of Bud. That's Richard Whitehouse. Something interesting. Ray Boomhauer at the Indiana Historical Society caught something interesting about that picture.
That we had never noticed.
That we had never noticed. The guy in back, I think, needed to go to the restroom. So, there they are, setting up a camp down in a valley, digging holes. I like this. Is David Graham. He's the one that was talking about the grenade story. I think that's a Browning automatic rifle there on the left of him. But that's up in those trenches. It's either on a mountainside and there's a valley below, and that's when the war was static at that point. And I absolutely love this picture. Here's this young guy. You see where he's got his pistol. He's real macho, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he looks like a baby.
Yeah.
He tells an interesting story. In the first battle that he was in, he was trying to find a place to get away from being shot at, and he fell into a honey pot. They put their honey pots down in the ground, and it was just full of human, yeah. And so he was up to his neck in it, and he got out of it, and he was trying to find another place to hide. Nobody wanted him to get, they were hiding behind boulders and things. They don't get around me, go away. And he just laid down and started crying because he couldn't, nobody would let him get behind a tree with him or anything like that. Anyway, he made it. I just read a book about civilian points of view during the Korean War. And it was just, it's just so disturbing of what happened to the civilian population. Whole villages were wiped out. Here's a picture of a reservist and the guy with the young Korean boy in front of him. That is Bill Wright. And this is a kid he found abandoned and took with him.
Yeah.
He would have starved to death. And Bill took him with him. He didn't know what else to do. And I've talked to many reservists and people in the Korean War, not many, but probably a half a dozen that did this very same thing. They might have had a little baby or a little boy or a little girl, and there just wasn't anything they could do. And in every case, they didn't make it. I don't know if that boy got pneumonia, and another one I know got killed in a mortar attack that guy was telling me about. But it's the tragedy of the civilians there, that it's just a lost story, the awful lost story of that war. And it didn't matter if you're North Korean or South Korean, with the armies coming through there, it's both ways, it was bad. And of course, there's the statue there that's built. Yeah. So Roxanne, you want to talk about Gordon Green, or was I going? Were you going to do that?
Oh, you were going to do that.
Okay. So Gordon Green comes back, and he's just tormented. And he comes back to Oakland City in 1984, and he pins a letter to Bud Fitch, tell Bud what's been going on. And he shared that letter with me later, with Roxanne and I. So he's writing to Bud, and he's reminiscing of their younger days together. And he said to Bud, "The summer of 1950, remember how we talked about combat as we rode double on your motorcycle to the countryside while waiting for the departure? I went back home this summer to see your house. Very few things, or very few there would know you or me. People and buildings have come and gone. Your home is still neat and trim. Those yens at the north end of the front yard are gone. They made a miserable end zone for football. Your mom looks great. Even though she's beyond 80 years old, there's that twinkle in her eye." And then he said, finally, "She remembers, Bud, probably every day since the telegram, she remembers." Gordon told us that Mrs. Fitch just never got over it, and she was mad at everybody, MacArthur, Truman, him, and
Gordon.
yeah, Gordon, and so forth. When we were trying to get letters, we knew that the Bud's letters, the family had the letters back and forth in the family correspondence. And we got to know Bud's brother, Gordon, who was at University of Kansas. And we asked if we could use those letters. I thought it would be really important to have that voice. And Mrs. Fitch wasn't sure, but she said, "Well, we'll let the family vote on it." So it was a 3-2 vote, and we got the letters. But the mother never talked about the war until this book came out. The family never knew any of the story, so it was very interesting to them to read the story. And it's also interesting that Bud's sister, who worked for a pharmaceutical company up in Chicago, shared that book with her boss, and her boss was in the book. He was at the battle where Bud was killed. And he said, "Oh my God, that's me. It's got his name in there. He was an executive officer that was wounded." And so it ended up being a small world. Roxanne?
we're gonna just touch on a little bit about when they came back home. And one thing that Randy had mentioned was that some of these reservists were World War II veterans. In fact, they got the title of two-time losers, because they, like the younger guys, didn't think there was going to be another war, but here they've not been back that long from World War II, and they're turning around and going back. There was also some friction between the regular Marines and the reservists, because the regulars, they'd been through boot camp and all that, and they kind of resented that these guys were Marines, and they hadn't been, but they gained a lot of respect over the time of the war. And one of these Evansville reservists, Ross Compton, for example, he was called Pappy. He was the oldest one. I think he was in his 30s, but the regulars saw he knew more about combat than anybody did. So anyway, those people gained a lot of respect. But one thing that they saw coming home was it was so different than coming home from World War II, because World War II, there were parades, they were heroes and all that. And these guys coming back from Korea, of course, their families, friends were thrilled to see them, but it was forgotten more or less. I mean, of course, it's called the Forgotten War, and people just weren't aware, weren't paying any attention. So, it was a very different homecoming there. And of course, they were thrilled to be home. The memories of the ones who didn't come home, of course, always stayed with them. Like you said, Gordon Green in particular, it just was sort of a lifelong burden that he carried. But like a lot of times soldiers do, what they wanted to do once they got home and got settled is they wanted to forget. They didn't want to think about it. They didn't want to talk about it. Their wives and families would ask them questions about the war, and they just didn't want to talk about it. But in the late 80s, Richard Everly, who was the one I pointed out in the picture, he started feeling this big longing. He just had this very strong feeling of longing for something. And he finally realized that what he wanted was to see these other guys again, see these other guys, that had been other reservists and been through so much together and everything. And so he and his wife ended up making that happen. And they spent, years trying to track people down and everything like that. And they had their first reunion in 1990. And one of the people said that the main thing they remember about that first reunion was the crying. Lots of crying. People said it was a very cathartic experience. They felt a release. They felt like a weight had been lifted. And so they talked about it all among themselves. And the wives, of course, they'd never heard any of these stories. And here these guys, were sharing all that and crying. And they ended up deciding to meet once a month, which is where, we first met them at one of their monthly meetings. And we went to those monthly meetings really for at least 2 years and the reunions too. And this group is the one that raised the money for this monument that's down there on the river. So that was one of their things that they worked toward. And I wanted to say, kind of choked up when I say this, but kind of one of the joys of our lives was getting to know these people, them sharing their stories with us, the guys, their families, and so forth. And it was a joy seeing how happy they were to have their story told.
There were many stories that weren't put in the book.
Yes.
The tape recorder went off. Things they had seen, things that had happened to them, things that they'd done. Bill Wright, who took that little boy under his wing, was so tenderhearted. He couldn't go by a gate that was unlatched without latching it up, even though the house had been blowing all the smithereens, because he thought they might be back. It just killed them to see some of the things they had to see during that time. And so many dramatic stories of narrow escapes, and some of them funny, of course. We just don't have time to go into, but it was a real privilege to write this. It was a real privilege to to be able to talk to them, and they let us come into their homes and share those things about an important part of American history that's unfortunately been forgotten. And if we would only listen to those stories, we might hesitate in going to the next war
Yeah.
so willingly. Was
So
there,
see if there's any questions.
is that the last?
I didn't even look at the time.
Okay, well, there's the book there. And there's all sorts of stories about the book, also about getting it published, but there's always an adventure in that, as some of you may
And
know.
we know we've probably run over a few minutes
Yeah.
here. Does anybody have any questions?
I think, first of all, I think, thank you for doing this. You know, you mentioned it once, Feel the History. My buddy John Carl's watching right now, and there's no doubt that this book feels the history. You feel what it's like to march into that battle, and then you had to turn around and march out. I can't imagine what it was like in unbelievable conditions. The stories you tell bring tears to my eyes. And again, my dad never said anything. He never talked about it at all, and I never said anything to him about it. And your book made it real. The next thing again is the 38th parallel is on I-69 right there at Morgan Avenue. And every time I drive past it, I think about what these guys did. Again, your book is just, I can't say it without getting tears in my eyes. Thank you guys, because it's so powerful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have to echo what you said, Rob. It really brings this piece of forgotten history. Yeah, I'm a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, this is Mark Browning. I want to just say several of the names you've mentioned. Number one, Tex Graham.
Yeah.
I used to golf with Tex Graham. He was probably the best baseball coach that Central had. He was a real sharp guy, and he could still golf his age. He was an amazing individual. There was another guy named Raleigh McGarry. I was in a group with him. He'd tell the jokes. He's got one son here that's living in town, another one living in Japan.
Yes.
Raleigh was a great guy. He was an Optimist Club, absolutely amazing individual. I think you said about a guy named Will.
Yeah.
Hermie Will.
Yeah.
I think if Hermie, if I got the right guy, he was in World War II, I believe, as well. And he went to Memorial. He was a great football player. He's a good friend of Norb Stone, my uncle. But there's amazing things you said here that it just really touches home. Every Memorial Day event, I always say the Chosin Reservoir. There's a guy named Clarence Mitzendorf. He was a construction worker for Skanska, and he was in Chosin Reservoir. I mean, you said 60 degrees below. I heard 30 degrees below. It was so terrible of a time. And you think a lot of these guys were just reservists. They were not really full-time anything. They were reservists. And the same thing happened to our reservists here in 2006 or so. They were here at the Reserve Center. And I was in the military 24 years. And you think as a reservist, they're never going to put you on the front line. But boy, I'll tell you, these guys in Korea, they got put on the front line. It's just absolutely what happened. And we had so many people from Evansville at the Chosin Reservoir. And that was just absolutely unbelievable fighting. And every Memorial Day, they mentioned the Chosin Reservoir because it was such a difficult time for our warriors. And a lot of it's represented here in Evansville. There's a guy named Don Gillis. He was in charge of getting the 38th parallel here. I put it up on YouTube when it was made. We went to the Reserve Center here. We made a big deal. We had talks and everything else there. Then they put the sign of the 38th parallel on I-69 there. And so it's the exact same parallel as in Korea. So Evansville's really got a lot of tight feelings with it. If you look at the downtown area, there's a monument. It was made by Mr. Dick, D-I-C-K, and I knew him well, and it took him about 10 years to get that approved. But it's a Korean exhibit on the Riverside Drive there, next to Vietnam exhibit, next to the Four Freedom Monuments. But that's about Korea. So I'd love to have you talk at the Evansville Wartime Museum in February this year. And we're gonna try to make a monument or something memorabilia on the Korean War, because there's lots of people from Evansville that were represented in that war.
Yeah.
This is Mark Browning. Thank you. This is just a superb talk. Superb. I got to get that book. Just absolutely superb. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I mean, my gosh.
If
Just
it,
a quick, I would echo everything everybody has said. Incredibly moving and outstanding presentation, and thank you. Where is Bud buried?
he's buried in Oakland City by his mother and father.
Okay. And does the marker indicates that he was killed in Korea?
I doubt it. They were not,
Really?
they were not fond of talking about the Korean War.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it's there's, of course, if you read the book, you know about the, there was a guy that I heard had been at the Chosen Reservoir in New York, and I sent him a letter asking him if he knew anything about Bud Fitch. And when he wrote back, I think he called me, I had my phone number there, and he said, when I saw your return address, I fell over, because he said, when I got out of Korea, I was reading through a Leatherneck magazine, and Bud's dad, Henry, had put a thing in there. Does anybody know how my son died? Can anybody tell me about my son? And he had been with Bud, and he still had that letter, and he remembered that address. And here I'm sending him a letter from the same address, and it just blew him away. It's like, how can that be? You know, and that, well, we bought the house, but yeah.
That's so cool.
And one other thing that might make you feel better about these guys, for all the stuff they took for not going to boot camp, some of them got sent to boot camp when they came back. Some of them got sent to boot camp
After being in the
after
war.
being in the war and getting decorated and all that stuff.
That doesn't seem
And
right,
so the
does it?
first day they were there, the drill sergeant, they were sitting under a shade tree, and the drill sergeant came over and just started ripping a new one. And they just grinned and said, "You can't do anything to us. We don't care." Go away.
What are you gonna do?
That's like classic military. We're going to send you to boot camp after you come back from war.
Yeah.
that's-
That was David Graham. David Graham was the one with it, looked like a little
Right.
boy there with his
Mhm.
gun there over his waistline there.
When you went to these gatherings of these old gentlemen, did you get a sense of what their attitude was towards China and the Chinese people today? I mean, is there a sense of bitterness and anger still
No,
70 years later?
Not at that
I
time.
didn't notice that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Interesting.
been more recently. I think, well, here's what happened. So the Chinese, the ones at Hagaroo that were in that perimeter, the Chinese would come into their lines without their weapons.
Mhm.
They were starving to death and they
Yeah.
were freezing to death.
Right.
Yeah.
They had cotton uniforms.
They didn't have hardly any protection against the weather, and it was so sad to hear that, like, all these frozen bodies, they had the.
So these
Bad.
Chinese would come in and their faces would be black from frostbite. I mean, they were gonna
Right.
die. And they just
Yeah.
felt so bad for them. So there was some sense of,
That's probably why they weren't bitter.
yeah, as bitter. I mean,
Interesting.
But no, I don't remember them ever talking in derogatory terms about, as you often hear. Now, I do remember one of them saying, I don't know if Desert Storm had occurred or one of those. And they were having one of their meetings at a restaurant there in Evansville, and the guy came up and he said, I'm just back from wherever he was back from. And he said, it's really something to take a 50 caliber machine gun, or what caliber they are now, and make a body go down the road with it. And
Wow.
they didn't speak. They were speechless. And one of the guys told that young man, he said, "You're going to be visited by that man someday.
Oh,
that
man.
guy. In your dreams,
Wow.
Oh,
you're going to
man.
see him. He's going to come back to you, and you'll spend much of your life thinking about that. But it's going to be in a different way it is now." So they had a
Wow.
real wisdom, I think, about that.
Mm-hmm.
A hard wisdom. But I would say they were still, some of them were really struggling with, they couldn't sleep at night and the nightmares and that,
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, PTSD hadn't been identified at that point,
Right.
but
Mhm.
a lot of them had it.
The other interesting thing in interviewing those people, and I picked this up because we've done Vietnam veterans and written a couple of books about Vietnam veterans too. People won't start talking about their armed forces experiences till they're about 50. Anybody before 50, they don't
Or
want to
older.
talk, or older. But once
Yeah.
they get 50, it's kind of a magical age. And then after that, a lot of times you can approach them. And then the interview process, you're going to hear a lot of jokes and funny things. And then you're going to hear some more serious things. And then you're going to get some crying. And then you're going to turn off the tape, you know, and then you're going to get the stuff you're after. But it's amazing what those people carry with them all their lives from that year experience. It's usually about a year, maybe not even that for combat. And yet it changes everything. I remember Vietnam veterans saying
Yes.
in the first
yes.
battle he was in, the second, he couldn't shoot his rifle. He was too scared. And when he started firing, he thought, my life has changed forever. And it had. I think he understood that. He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he felt it in that charged atmosphere.
We have a collection of Vietnam letters, and one of the things I tell students when they're looking at them is sometimes it's not what they've written, but what they haven't written.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, Rick Winter's letters, some of them, he almost makes it sound like they're off at summer camp, you know? And then another letter, he can't hold it in anymore. Right. And it just has to come out. And when I talked to him, he would often say, I didn't want to freak everyone out at home. Right. I didn't want them scared. But sometimes you had to let it out. And it's a challenge to get those materials as you know, you and I talked the other day when I went around to American Legions, the Korean vets wouldn't talk to me at all. And the Vietnam vets all said, I burned everything when I came home. I burned my medals. I burned my uniforms. I burned everything. So it's sad.
Another comment about the letters, and this shows up in the Unexpected Journey book. So you got somebody like Gordon Green writing his mother and, you know, writing his teachers. And then you've got him and others writing each other that are the same ages. Those letters,
They're very different.
they're very different. They are, and they're humorous in that regard of what they're
Yes,
telling their moms. So, you know, I'm going to church every time it's open. I'm not gambling or drinking. And then what they tell their friends. And then you know that some of those things they're saying are physically impossible to do anyway. You know, they're claiming they've done. They don't know what I don't know if they're just pulling the legs of their friends back home. They're too innocent to know the difference or what. But yeah, it's interesting to see those letters too.
And the letters are like a time machine.
Yes.
You know, you're back that point of view. So that's neat that you've got those letters
Yeah, and
in the archives.
you do the interviews and then you read the letters and you say, hey,
Yes.
Bob, you said this, but your letter says this. And they start, you have 2 or 3 interviews just working through that as they start remembering things differently from the letters informing them. So it's an interesting process there of having those letters and being.
I've run into that with World War II vets. What they remembered years later,
Yes.
of course, you know, you don't want to tell them they're wrong,
Right.
but you kind of try to jog their memory. And but I've run into that before, you know.
Or you have an event in a battle and you've got 6 different witnesses and they've got 6 different stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's fun. So you look at the things that they have in common that you can stand on, and the rest you just put out there as well. This guy said this and this guy said this.
Right. Well, thank you so much. That was just wonderful.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think what you guys did, you made history the story of people.
Yes.
You know, and as my friend Terry Hughes says, that's what history is all about. You know, it's not the events, it's the people story. And it brings tears to my eyes because I can't, again, I can't say it. I can't say thank you enough because you opened a part of me that I didn't know I had. And thank you very much. And I think also it's the universality of war. You know, this is just Evansville, Indiana. You know, this is just one story about one reserve company in Evansville, Indiana, God knows how many reserve companies across the United States experience this, whether it's in Korea, Vietnam, that was my era of Vietnam, and how Vietnam ever happened. I don't understand it, especially after knowing more about Korea, but you made it the history of people. So thank you very much. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Very welcome.
I think that, James, you're talking about, it's a national grief that we all feel. I remember going to the Vietnam War Memorial, and I didn't know I was going to do this, but I stood in there and saw those 58,000 names, and
Right.
I just fell to my knees sobbing. I was just overcome with that. And Korea needs that too. That needs that mourning as well. And so maybe that's what that book helps to do is get us there. One of the initial complaints I would get from people when they'd read our book or any of the books that we've written or I've written is, how come you have all this context? And then they get to the battles with these guys. Oh, wow, I understand now what was unique about what's
Right.
going on and how everything connects. So I guess that's the teacher in me trying to give them the context. So they don't always want that, they want to get right to the good stuff. But thank you for letting us
Yes,
do
thank
this.
you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you
Anybody
so
else?
much.
Any other comments? Well, it's hard to say this, you guys,
Fantastic.
but we're done for the year. And we won't see each other until February next year. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, will all be past next time we see each other. And our board will get together and we will come up with a plan. Jennifer mentioned, if you weren't here earlier, that Browning Library, our Browning room is still under limited room or limited occupation. So we don't know where we're going to be next year, but we'll stay in touch with everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving and Christmas. And again, Randy and Roxanne, I cannot thank you enough. I mean, from my heart,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you
God-
very much.
God bless, and I
Thank
wish you all peace.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.